Hurricane Dorian is buffeting the North Carolina coastline with 100-mile-an-hour winds. Good evening, I'm Mike Nasel with yet again another video update on our Hurricane Dorian. As of 11 p.m. Eastern Time, Dorian advisory number 51. Think about how many advisories have come out on this thing. Dorian was at 33.8 north, 77.4 west, winds still 100 miles per hour, so it's a powerful hurricane, a Category 2, moving northeast at 13, paralleling the North Carolina coastline, and the forecast has it moving near or over the Outer Banks over the next 12 to 18 hours, and then by Friday night, tomorrow night, it should be up and out. By Saturday night, up here into areas of Nova Scotia where there are now hurricane watches. Remember Hurricane Juan back in '03, that hit Nova Scotia pretty hard. The Canadian Maritimes, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, they do tend to get hit by these storms as they're racing to the north, and that's what Dorian should do. By Sunday night, it should be way out of here, and we won't have to ever deal with it again. You can see the wind field with Dorian, of course, it's been around since August 24th, 12 days, almost 2 weeks. It's hard to believe that it was that long ago, but Dorian started as a tropical wave, tropical depression, tropical storm. We wondered if it would survive and originally thought it would take a track more like that. It survived, became a hurricane, and then obviously a Category 5 and stalled in the Bahamas, and it's now a Category 2 off North Carolina. Nevertheless, the hurricane force winds are just offshore, although you might be getting close to hurricane force and gusts in North Carolina. Tropical storm force winds, of course, affecting areas of North Carolina right now. There's the infrared satellite imagery, and again, obviously the convection has shrunk. You could see that over time the area of thunderstorms has really shrunk down. The hurricane is weakening. It's going to be dealing with cooler waters, higher wind shear, and you can see the troughiness here in that direction, and the clouds here extending all the way into Pennsylvania and West Virginia around the cloud shield of Hurricane Dorian. But the hurricane obviously moving now northeast, but that could bring the center ashore right over the Outer Banks here if we extrapolate that motion. So we may still see a landfall officially, but it's still too early to say. What a difficult hurricane to predict. This one was really bad, guys. Not just for its impacts, obviously, but just for forecasting. Nowadays, we've pretty much got track forecasting down pat, and we got to give it to the guys at the Hurricane Center. They predicted that this storm was going to be a monster and stop cold in its tracks over the Bahamas, and it did. If this were even 10 or 15 years ago, they would have evacuated the entire east coast of Florida. Nevertheless, there's the eye of Dorian, right offshore areas, say Cape Fear, North Carolina, headed in the general direction of Wilmington and the Outer Banks the next couple of hours. One of the threats with Dorian that we should really be concerned about is flooding. Remember 20 years ago, back in 1999, Hurricane Floyd flooded the areas of North Carolina very badly. Hopefully, this doesn't flood as bad as Floyd, but we do have flash flood warnings out for Onslow and Duplin counties. That's where you had those tornado warnings earlier. And of course, the Doppler radar has indicated that 4 to 8 inches have already fallen, and we're going to have an additional 3 to 6. So that's, 7 to 14 inches of rain within the next 24 hours, and that includes areas like North Topsail Beach, Folkestone, Midway Park, Cypress Creek. A lot of these communities here in North Carolina are going to be running the risk of serious flooding. There's the radar, and you can see the eye. It skirted Cape Fear, and it's moving right to the northeast in the general direction of Cape Lookout. That's Bald Head Island and Cape Fear. The eye already passed it with some heavy weather, and the strongest winds are obviously very, very close to the center. So as long as it stays offshore, you're going to get very nasty winds, but you're not going to get those 100-mile-an-hour winds, and most of that would probably be in gusts since the hurricane is weakening at this point. But still, heavy, heavy rain. Look at this severe weather, this constant onshore flow, so that storm surge and the water rises are going to be very significant, and you'll want to be careful because, again, the risk of storm surge flooding combined with the high water and the inland flash flooding, that could create treacherous conditions in North Carolina. So it's a rainy night in North Carolina tonight, believe you me, as Hurricane Dorian moves to the northeast. As I mentioned, we do have the threat of severe weather and tornado watch until 7 in the morning, and this was extended southward from the one we had earlier. You could see anywhere New Bern and Hatteras, Elizabeth City, you're all in this tornado watch because the right side of a hurricane, that onshore flow of severe weather, we already had a pretty nasty one in North Myrtle Beach. We had one in Emerald Isle earlier, and they both caused some problems. So hurricanes spawn tornadoes. People forget about that all the time, and especially if they're wrapped up in that rain shield, you won't be able to see them. They're rain wrapped, and that means they could be sneaking up on you. So you want to be very, very careful to stay tuned to your local emergency officials and your weather alerts to see if any tornado warnings are issued. I'm sure there will be more of them. I did want to touch on, before we end the update, we do have Tropical Storm Gabrielle barely holding on. It is still forecast to re-strengthen close to a hurricane, but it's going to remain out at sea. The bigger concern, other than Hurricane Dorian, is this tropical wave right here that just left Africa. And some of the models a couple of days ago were making this a hurricane approaching the Lesser Antilles next week. Only the Canadian model still shows a hurricane approaching the islands. The GFS doesn't do too much with it, and neither does the European, but they didn't do much with the wave that spawned Dorian either. So we're going to keep an eye on this because it is the heart of hurricane season, another wave about to move off, more behind it. So hurricane season 2019 continues, and some of the climate models show that October, late season, could be kind of active. So it's not over yet, with a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane scraping the North Carolina coastline tonight. I'm Mike Nasa with the latest on Hurricane Dorian. I'll see you next time.